Welcome to You Got Moxie, the podcast about the how of change making. I'm your host, Julie Ann Crommett, and today we're excited to welcome Carlos Lopez Estrada. Carlos is an award-winning filmmaker, and he's here to share his journey into the craft of filmmaking. He talks about how music and film ignited his passion for storytelling that challenges the status quo. He opens up about key moments that fueled his drive for change and the relentless pursuit of diverse perspectives. With a focus on asking the right questions and finding alternative paths, Carlos offers insights on creating impactful narratives. Tune in and learn about how he's inspired, recharges, and continues to push the boundaries of filmmaking. Welcome, Carlos. It's so exciting to have you here.
It's great to be here. I'm happy to see you and excited to be a part of this wonderful thing you got going on.
Oh, thanks, Carlos. As always, it's just a pleasure. I love seeing your face, and also your bookcase. For those who are seeing us on video, has a light bright, a Jack Skeleton skull, I believe. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's my life displayed via objects.
Love it. For folks listening at home, if you could just share a little bit about your story, like who are you? How did you get into filmmaking? We just listed out your impressive resume, but really talking about your story. And if you could share as part of that, when was a key moment that sticks out to you in your story where you realized change needed to happen? Positive change needed to happen. It can be anything, small, large, but share a little bit about yourself.
I was born in Mexico City. I was born into a family that was very dedicated to the arts. My grandma was a theater actor, did a lot of like community theater, then professional theater. Grandpa was a journalist that covered arts in a Mexico City newspaper. And I think from there on, like a lot of my family was very interested in just creative work. So I think since I was very, very young, I would love to do little plays with my friends and do little movies with a home camera recorder and take pictures. And I was just kind of like those curious kids. So I think that kind of really was with me from the beginning. But I think that the time when I really realized that there was something here that interested me on like a just like more visceral level was because of MTV. And that's when I was, an early teenager, and I discovered music videos. And I would come home from school every day and turn on MTV and just kind of like leave it playing in the background for the rest of the day until I went to bed. I love music, so I think it was just a very natural thing. I started playing in bands, started making little videos for the bands that I would play in. But that's when something clicked, and it was like, oh, this is a very beautiful intersection of so many things that I care about. It's obviously the music of it, but it's also film and some of these music videos that I grew up watching from like the 90s and early 2000s. They're like experimental art films, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like this meeting point of commercial filmmaking and experimental filmmaking, and a lot of them were narrative little shorts. So I think just something clicked, and it was like, this is cool. I really like this. I hope that one day I get to be a person who gets to make these. And I would just sit on the grass outside of my house, and I remember listening to music and just like closing my eyes and imagining um if I ever were to make a music video for the song, like these are the images that I would put to this music. And I have those very, very vivid memories still. Time passed. My stepdad and I moved to the States. I continued playing in bands. I was living in Miami at the time. And this one, it was like the first, I mean, I'll say serious, but I was still like 14. The first serious band I played in, um, we would do tours up and down Florida and play like small but decent venues. And at some point I was like, "Hey guys, I would love to make a video." And that was kind of like how it really started. I made videos for them, then I made videos for my friends' bands. Then I came to California to study film, did music videos there with, now I had access to cameras and lights and other people who wanted to help. And that was just kind of like snowballed quickly. Long story short, fast forward 6 or 7 years, and my first movie, Blind Spotting, came from a music video collaboration that I had with David Diggs, and I worked with his band Clipping a whole lot. We did like 7 or 8 videos together, and then after the whole Hamilton craze, and after his life kind of like took a really incredible turn, he had the chance to make this movie with his writing partner, and because I'd been working with him for years, they were like, we feel like this could be an interesting combination, and then my life changed forever.
Amazing. And I've known you a while now, and I somehow didn't connect the dots from like the obsession with music, so to speak. I come from a family of musicians, so I identify with this really
Oh,
deeply. Um,
we'll talk about.
and I don't know if you know, my dad's a classically trained opera singer. I don't know if you know that.
I think maybe you may have mentioned, but
Yeah.
I have questions for you.
Yeah, no. There's so much to unpack. And I was curious, you think about blind spotting and the work that you've done, like, and obviously that came out of the collaboration with David, and everyone. Like, was there a moment either making that film or when you were thinking about your creative work where you were like, oh God, change needs to happen. It needs to happen now.
Yes, yes. The answer is yes. Growing up, especially as I started making movies, as I started when I did Blind Spotting, working with David and Rafa, who are obviously just like brilliant people. But I think even before that, I I think I discovered sort of like rap and some like punk music, and it was through music that I started realizing that, oh, this stuff can, like, you can make creative work, you can exercise your imagination, and also um, plant ideas or ask questions and allow people to sort of like have discussions through your art. And that was sort of like very present for me. Blind Spotting definitely cemented it, and I knew that the type of storytelling that I wanted to be a part of was that type, the type that asked questions, the type that could lead to meaningful conversations, and that would allow people to sort of like engage with themselves and with each other in ways that maybe they wouldn't had they not have this art. But I feel like the real moment where something clicked was not for a minute, and that was when I was at Disney. You are actually a big part of it. Um, but I remember. So, okay, maybe sorry for anyone who doesn't know. I did Blind Spotting, and then very shortly after, I got staffed as a director at Walt Disney Animation Studios. It was the first time they let anyone from the outside. They like scout someone because normally they just bring people up through either animation or storyboarding. And anyway, this was like a kind of like a big deal. And I was there. It was just very overwhelming because I love Disney because this is like a huge corporation. Because I was used to very independent
Right.
type of filmmaking, and all of a sudden we had like a crew of over 600 people, and budgets that are like more money than I've ever heard associated with a movie. Just like
Right,
lots
right.
lots of stuff that was new for me. And I still feel like a kid, but back then I was like really, really a kid, and I was just like wide-eyed, just being like, "This is amazing. How am I here?" I was just so caught in it, and I remember I met with this like younger artist from there. We had a coffee, and she just like sat me down, and she was like, "I hope you understand how big of a deal it is that you're here." And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, talk to me more. He was like, "Well, I don't know if you've realized, but see every director in the studio, and they all are sort of like a very particular demographic, and there's no people of color, there's no young people directing." And then something clicked, and I was like, "Oh, I mean, of course you're right. I just hadn't even had the time to like process that."
Mm,
I did a little bit of research, and Disney Animation in their 100-year history. they were like 98 years old when I joined. Had never had a director of color in ever in any project in 98 years of existence, and I was the first. And this like young woman telling me that just made something click. It was like, oh, not only has there been a very serious problem here, but also fate somehow put me in a position where like now I have the ability to affect that. And not only am I just like me being here is important, but also now that I am here, what can I do to make sure that things get better, and what can I do to make sure that can I just improve, the next 100 years here. And that was a very important moment. That was also around the time where I met you, and I feel like the work that you were doing at Disney was so illuminating, was so inspiring, and I think gave me sort of like the role model version of like, oh, I'm over here, she's over here, and the work that she's doing is exactly what I wish I could be doing. So I think being close to you for those years definitely offered like a very clear guiding light.
Oh my God. Well, thank you for that, first of all. And secondly, I think it's what's really interesting about your story. And we've had a few other guests before you as well who have shared something similar, which was that there was some version of an aha moment. And it usually had to do with a very personal experience that happened, like whether in your case it was somebody that just sat you down and went, hey, I'm going to point something out to you, right? Or they themselves had something pointed out, right? Like they couldn't do something, right? And that was the aha moment. And so sometimes it just starts with something small, like a coffee conversation, right? And it starts to illuminate something much bigger. And as people are sitting at home, car, or wherever they are listening to us, one of the things I've struggled with, I know you and I have talked about previously, which is when you start pulling on the thread, the thing gets really big. Like suddenly you're like, oh my God, there's so many things to tackle. Like, you identify one thing and then you realize that it's attached to 500 other things that also need to change, right? And so when you had that aha moment, and this is you were on Raya and the Last Dragon at the time for folks, chronologically. And, how did you decide kind of where to start? I mean, you had this revelation. How did you think about like, oh, where am I going to start with this? Because I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed when we think about all the pieces. What advice do you have, or how did that happen for you about thinking about where to start?
I think that was a great question, and I don't know that I have a great answer because as you just mentioned, it's like it was such, it's been like a 6 year journey, and I feel like I'm just now getting my bearings. I think it was a multi pronged process, and I think it started with asking a lot of questions, and I feel like um, for whatever it's worth, I kind of feel like every process should start with that because I feel like more often than not we kind of like jump into something and not give ourselves the benefit to like try our best to understand why we're doing it. And I get it, it's life, but to me it was very important to take a step and say like, okay, I had a visceral reaction to this conversation that we had. I noticed that there is a problem here. What does this mean? um, how can I become a part of pushing the conversation in the right direction? What actually is the problem? Like, let me just sit down and like write down everything that I'm noticing that speaks to what I'm trying to become a part of the solution for. And then also just meeting people who are like a little bit further along in the process to offer some guidance and offer some ideas and offer some perspective. You were a big part of that group of people, but it was also for me more specifically, like I was in at Disney and I was like, okay, let me just start talking to people, and I'm going to talk to people who are new here, and I'm going to talk to people who have been here for 30 years. I talk to people who are like really exciting about this new era, of the company and the studio, and I'm also going to try to talk to people who are kind of like old school thinkers and just love like tradition, and just like really try to understand how this organism worked. And so I think that was the first part. And then also I did some exercises with you that I'm sure you remember well, but it was kind of like I don't know what to call them, like soul searching exercises of just being like, well, there's a lot of issues around us. There's a lot of things that could be better. There's a lot of things that are unfair, but trying to become a part of the solution to all of them is likely impossible, and
Yep.
is going to dilute your energy and your effort. So, based on your experiences, based on your interest, and based on the things that like really speak to you on a deeper level, like what are the areas that you want to be involved with? And I don't even remember what I said, but it was probably something having to do with like my identity and the Latina community, and also creating opportunities for early career filmmakers, because I felt like that was really, really a blind spot where like that led to all of the other issues. I was just like, I think that if there were more serious processes in place to uplifting voices that normally are not well represented or empowered, then I feel like a lot of these other areas of issues are going to get a lot better. So anyway, I think it was a conversation like that, and then from then on it became so much easier for me to say like, okay, this is what I'm going to focus my energy on. I know what questions to ask. I know what kind of allies and friends and like people I should be reaching out to for assistance. And yeah, I mean, not to say that it was easy from them, but it gave me some a structure in terms of focusing my efforts.
Absolutely. What's really interesting about what you did is you purposely sought out opinions and perspectives that were diverse in and of themselves, like in asking the questions. Like you talked, to people who were new, who people who'd been there 30 years, all kinds of different backgrounds of folks, because you were trying to really assess like, hey, what's really going on? Let me wrap my head around these different perspectives and make it clearer for myself. I think it's a really cool, tangible takeaway here, which is like, don't limit it to just the people that you think might agree with you, or who, you think, oh, like they're all going to have all the answers, because nobody is. Like, it's like really going out and seeking that diversity of perspectives. I really loved about what you shared in the asking questions, like part of it.
I think that was really important, and I learned that quickly. And I think being at Disney was so helpful because, it's a gigantic organization. The studio's been around for 100 years. Uh, and I learned quickly is like, look, if I just put together people, sorry, if I just put together a group of people who think like me, we're going to get very little done, because we're young and we're loud and we're annoying, and like people can only get that in like small doses. So it's like, if we really actually want to affect the larger organism, we're going to need people who are questioning, and who are like maybe not fully on board, and how can we talk to them about what change looks like. And that was very important. And I think the other ingredient that was definitely, I mean, I learned it not by choice but by force, is just like being relentless. Just because these are tricky conversations to have, especially at a place like Disney. And my strategy was just like, try everything, push for everything that you think is exciting, and maybe you'll have 30 ideas that will die, and you will have one that goes through,
Yep.
and then from there you turn that one opportunity into like 30 others. But I think it really required some like strength of spirit, because there's something like, hey, what if we try this thing, and what if we do this mentorship thing? It's like, oh no, we can't, because of 100 corporate reasons. And it's like,
Right.
okay, what if we do it this other way? Oh no, we can't do that. You have to talk, and that just became like a cycle, until eventually someone was like, oh, I think that doesn't sound horrible. Let's try it. And then, all of a sudden this door opens.
That's exactly right. And also really great advice of like how you deal with like the no, right? Or any resistance, right? And I love this. Like sometimes you just have to take like 30 shots and one is going to stick. but all the different angles and the different ways in which you can look at that. We used to joke, and with the legal department, my joke always used to be a no is just a journey to yes.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about what you were just saying as like a reflection of that. And I actually think when people push back, it refines your argument. I actually think you get
Oh,
smarter.
100%. And it really forces you to be creative. I think that navigating politics, and you're like, that's boring office stuff, and it's like actually it involves a lot of creative muscles. And if all of a sudden you try this thing that doesn't land, you're like, oh, I noticed that when I said this one particular thing, the room just immediately like shut off, and it's like,
Right.
okay, well, we still need to get there, but I can't say that because that didn't work. So
Right.
what if I am just smart and, Trojan horse the conversation so that
That's
we
right.
still get there, but everyone's excited about it. And that requires a whole lot of brain activity, but it was fun.
I think it's actually creative thinking, which in many ways, if you treat it that way, it can enliven you as opposed to drain you. And it's a lot of advice I talk about with folks who are like, how do I kind of keep going when I keep meeting that resistance? And I said, you have to actually kind of think of it as a creative exercise. Like, think about the resistance as sharpening your tool, like iron sharpens iron, you know?
100%. And I just to like build on what you're saying, I think that patience is also a key part of it. I think that when you're hungry for change in any type of organization, or I feel like it stems from like a real honest reason, and it stems from urgency. And obviously you're just like, this needs to change like today, and you have all this energy. So I think when you're realizing that it's like, oh, this may not change today, this may not change tomorrow, this may not change in 5 months, like that could be so demoralizing. And I think that it's easy to just get caught up, get lost in like the waiting of it all. But as you're mentioning, I think that all that time where things aren't happening as fast or as like uh, uh, in impactful ways as you imagine, there's some stuff that's going on within you where you're understanding concepts clearly, you're learning how to communicate better, you're finding creative ways to solve. And to me, I was at Disney for uh, like 3.5 years. I did some work there, like not like creative work like the movies, but behind the scenes that I'm very proud of. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like, oh, I feel like I introduced 50 ideas and maybe two took off, and like and that could seem as like a pretty discouraging ratio. But then I left Disney and I started my own company, and all of a sudden I started at this point of being like, these are all the things that I would try to do at Disney that I couldn't for whatever reason. And now I have my own entity that I don't need to ask a million people for answers or permission to do anything. I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had the Disney years. And even though they were frustrating, they definitely, like, the aggregate was good. So anyway, I think patience is not often talked about in these conversations, and I think it's important to remember.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think, it sort of leads me really to my last question, and then I'd love to talk for you to talk a little bit about the work you're doing today, which is, when it can become draining, right, and demoralizing. I talk a lot about, and it's a common theme in the podcast too, about burnout around, like, feeling exhausted. This is a time in history that is quite exhausting, like objectively quite exhausting. There's a lot of change at once. When that happens, it does something on the nervous system, as well. And so my question for you is, how do you recharge? How do you invest back in your cup, if you will, like filling your cup, especially when it takes a long time to make change, in the long run?
I mean, I feel like the most important is definitely surrounding yourself with people who inspire you and who you look up to and who you're going to learn from, because I feel like sometimes we get caught up in our own ways, and you know our worlds are small. I mean, it's the idea of diversifying everything, like your friends' point of views, like how you're spending time, because sometimes our worlds are small and we have very limited perspective, and I think that it's easy to get just like feel stuck, and then all of a sudden you let a external force in, and they show you a door and a window that you would have never imagined, and you're like, oh wow, look, it's the world's actually a lot more bigger than it felt a minute ago. So I think, and what that could be, friendships, that could be art, that could be listening to music and seeing movies and seeing theater. Like, I feel like that could manifest itself in a million ways, but I do think that seeking those opportunities to expand your world and your worldview are very important. And another thing that I just wanted to say based off of that is finding alternative paths. Um, I remember as I was leaving Disney, I was feeling very depressed because, not to, I mean, I love that place and I met incredible people. It was time to go and that was fine, but I was feeling depressed because I was like, I'm at this organization that touches like the lives of millions and millions and millions of people every day. There will never be a better opportunity to kind of like be an agent of change anywhere else. Is like anywhere that I go after this is going to be lesser than, and like I'm stepping away from the greatest opportunity that I'll ever have to like um be a part of, the movement that I want to see in filmmaking. uh and that was really hard for me, and then I started my own company, and it's this like tiny, tiny effort that started with two people, and then two became four, and it's still small, but I didn't realize how the freedom of not working under a corporation, the freedom of being a decision maker, the freedom of doing things on a grassroots level and independently and a lot more scrappy. It was like all of a sudden I was able to do all the things that I was not able to do at Disney in a way that was so much more like so much faster, and it kind of became really like I feel like I'm doing more stuff that I could have ever done at Disney. And maybe one thing there would have affected millions, but now I'm able to do 50 things that maybe affect three people, but that's good. uh
Right.
so that was a really good lesson for me in being like, the biggest, bigger is not better. And I feel like we live in this like messed up society that teaches you that unless you're at the top of the tops, then you could always be doing better. And this was a really, really good example of saying like, no, actually there's different ways of doing things. Bigger is not better. And if you can have a really strong impact on five people versus just like a very medium sized impact on so many, like that's means something.
It absolutely does. And I love that you said that because there is this real idea of like the impact of one, like the domino effect, right? Or the butterfly effect, if you will, of you're like you're saying the quality of interaction and the depth of connection actually makes a difference. And by the way, science would back you up on that, but that um, from that, right, is where we can actually get scaled impact. And we don't think about it that way, but that's the reality because honestly, no one person is going to change the whole thing. It takes a whole coalition of us. So, how does that happen? That happens through deep relationship and then the relationships and the network effects from there. And I don't know about you, Carlos, like the way you just described it, that gets me really excited, like out of bed, you
Yeah,
know?
no,
Yeah.
me too. It like gave me so much hope in independent filmmaking. It gave me so much hope in like grassroots organizing of it, not just political, but like on any level. Just the fact that you can kind of take control of your narrative, and you don't need this like gigantic organization in order to like do the things that you feel like are important. So that, yeah, that was very that I'm very happy with how it has all shaped up.
Carlos, we cannot thank you enough for coming on today sharing your insights, sharing your journey. We are so excited about what you and Anti-Gravity are doing and cannot wait to sort of keep supporting you on this journey and continuing the friendship. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. Every time I talk to you, I feel like just like my world expands and it fills my tank. So I'm happy to do it today and always.
Thanks again for joining us for You Got Moxie. Continue to follow us and listen to your favorite episodes at collectivemoxie, MOXIE.com. That's collectivemoxie.com. We're excited to see you next time. Take care.